In this one, Dr. Paul Felton talks through the biomechanics of finger spin bowling and explains how you can spin the ball further with correct technique based on all the research that has been conducted. Let's go.
So today we're going to talk a bit about biomechanics of finger spin bowling. So we're going to talk a little bit about the outcome, a little bit about the technique, and then a little bit about what we need our bodies to do to be able to produce that technique. Right, so the first question we looked at is how do we take wickets in test match cricket as finger spin bowlers? So we took 70,000 Hawkeye deliveries, took all the information that gives us and started to ask some questions about economy and average. So all of this data has been gathered together and expressed as a left-arm bowler bowling to a right-hand batter. So if we walk down, we want a release point somewhere around the stumps, fairly close to the middle of the stumps, which if you're a left-hander, you'll be very close with that action. And then we're going to walk down and talk a little bit about the length, the line, and the turn that you need to take wickets. So the first thing that's important is the length that we bowl and the line that we bowl. So we know that to take wickets with the lowest economy and had the lowest average, we want to pitch it about 4 to 5 metres away from the batter within the stump line. So if we walk down, I've put some circular discs out. So red is high average, high economy, which if you bowl short, you're probably going to expect. It gets a little bit better if you get a little bit fuller, but then we kind of get into the magic area of 4 to 5 metres, and the blue disc represents the perfect length, which is 4.4 metres away from the batter's stumps. You see that there's some lined markers, and again you can see the green one in the middle is the perfect line, which is just about middle and leg to the right-handed batter. Again, the wider you get both directions, the worse the average and the worse the economy. So as expected, if you bowl outside off and it turns away, it becomes wide. If you bowl down leg and it doesn't turn as much, you get a free hit down the leg side effectively. So they're not uncommon for what we already know in cricket. Now the final thing that's important is turn. So the green line with the green markers represents the perfect delivery. So it pitches on the blue mark 4.4 metres from the batter's stumps, and it turns so that when it reaches the batter, it turns about 10 centimetres. And the reason for it being the most important or the most effective delivery is if you put a batter in, if he comes forward and plays the ball on the line, and it doesn't turn, it hits the middle of the bat. If it does turn, he's now got to work out whether to play for the turn or not, but you're still bringing in all modes of delivery. So if it turns, he could miss it, hits off stump, he could nick it, keeper or slip take a catch, and if it doesn't turn, it might go straight on and it might be LBW within this region as well. So all modes of delivery on a good length, which we're trying to drag the batter forward, it's on that length where you could go back or forward, brings all modes of delivery in to practice. That was the delivery we found was the most effective as a finger spin bowler in test match cricket for both average and economy. Okay, so now we're going to go on to talk about how we turn a cricket ball with a finger spin action in terms of the technique. Now we know that we need to turn it a little bit at that end to get the wickets that we need and to keep the economy down. So first of all, let's revisit what traditional coaching manuals or thinking suggests the finger spin bowling action should be about. So all of them start with a run-up, and we're going to talk a bit about the angles later, but you can have different angled run-ups into your crease. But one of the key points that they make is that at back foot contact, we land with our pelvises side on and our shoulders side on. And that generally aligns with a foot that points out this way, so your back foot is side on as well. And then from this position, we land with a braced front leg. Sometimes this can be bent, so as long as you keep it at a fixed angle, it's not too much of a problem, but a braced front leg, and we drive this back leg through, and then we rotate all of these segments through to get this hand on the inside of the ball that we can then pull down and generate the spin towards the batter. So that's what the traditional coaching manual says we should do as finger spin bowlers. But actually, what did the research that we conducted at Loughborough University show? So in 2010, most of the coaching around finger spin bowling was still based on the coaching literature, any manuals, any coach development courses. But we hadn't actually asked the questions of is this what the best finger spin bowlers in the world do? So at Loughborough University we conducted a study with a number of finger spin bowlers, and we pulled out 30 key technique characteristics which we believed were linked to the amount of spin generated on the ball. So what do we find? Well, we found that there was one technique characteristic which explained 50% of the amount of spin on the ball. What was this? And that was your pelvis position at front foot contact. So the coaching manual talks about getting side on at back foot contact, but we don't really talk about what happens at front foot contact. And we found that this technique characteristic was that this pelvis position was somewhere midway, pointing towards maybe square leg or maybe slightly more towards fine leg at front foot contact. Now the question is why? And we believe as researchers that the reason for this is we know that this X factor, or pelvis hip separation, whatever word you want to use it, where if you look from above, line through your shoulders, line through your pelvis, if you split them, the amount of this difference, or the bigger the difference is between the two, the faster you can throw, the further you can hit a golf ball. And it's probably related in finger spin bowling that actually the bigger this stretch, the more spin you can get on the ball. Now if your pelvis is too front on, your stretch is here, and then your pelvis is already here, you can't rotate any further around or you get away from the target. If you're still side on, this X factor split now takes your arm again out of this target alignment, and this position we see causes a lot of throwing issues because you haven't actually got the mobility to get your arm up and over your head's in the way. So what happens is your brain finds a way to complete the bowling action, bends the elbow and comes round. So we believe that the optimal position is a position which is very individual to each bowler, but your pelvis is some way towards midway, you stretch back, and this angle is going to be individual so this arm does not get beyond side on, and it still allows you to come up, over and round to complete your bowling action. So the next parameter that's really important, and almost as important as what your pelvis is doing at front foot contact, was where your pelvis finished at ball release. And we found that almost explained the same amount of spin as the position at front foot contact. So from this position, and your front arm will be doing something as well, but I'm keeping it down to keep it out of the way so you can see what's going on. You'll start in this position, and then this pelvis has to rotate round, and we found that those that had the highest spin rates, and I've put my foot down to make it easier, because you're driving round, were beyond side on. So you're in a position where you rotate from here with this pelvis, and I'll leave my arm out of it for a second, but at ball release you want to be beyond front on. And the reason for this is it then allows everything else to keep coming round and acting towards the target, but we're going to talk about that in a second when we talk about actually the whole sequence together. So now we've talked about how important the movement of the pelvis is. What happens in the rest of the action? So we get in this position, and we've talked about the feet already, and the coaching manual. It's almost saying that we want to stay square and like side on. But in reality, to get this pelvis in the position that's right for you, you're probably going to align your feet with your pelvis to try and help it. So if you have a big X factor, you're probably going to be a little bit more front on than some players. If you have less X factor, you might be a little bit more side on than some players and generate that pull round. But ultimately your feet will probably be aligned with what your pelvis is doing so that you can then rotate and pull round. So your pelvis rotates round to ball release, we know that. What do the shoulders do? Well, when the pelvis has gone and rotated, your shoulders then follow, and we've seen that the shoulders also go beyond front on at ball release. So you go pelvis, your shoulders start to come, and then the last action is your hand and your fingers on the ball, pulling down the side of the ball. And one thing that often surprises players is that we pronate at the end. We don't bowl like that off spin, we pronate. The reason for that is this finger stays on the ball for much more time and allows you to put more force, more spin, and generate lots of revolutions and hopefully drift and turn at the far end in the business area. Okay, so a little bit more about supination, pronation. So the way I like to think about it, supination, create a soup bowl, pronation's the other way. A lot of people think that we supinate to bowl off spin and turn the ball. So if we're bowling supinate, off spin that direction. But actually what happens is our brains find a way to hold onto the ball as long as possible. And if you look at videos of American quarterbacks, American footballers throwing a ball, you'll see that they all drag down and keep their finger on the ball for as long as possible. Exactly the same happens in off-spin bowling. So your ball, you start here, and as you come over, you're going to twist with your internal rotation of your shoulder and then pull down. And that's exactly the same as what happens. So as you come over, you twist down and you start to spin the ball. And as you let go of it, it has that nice turn or off spin turn that you have. It allows you to keep this finger on the ball for as long as possible and generate much more spin because you have a lot more time to generate and transfer that force, momentum, energy, whatever you want to call it, onto the ball. Okay, so the final part of this puzzle really is how do we get ourselves set into this front foot contact position from the part before. Now, there's a bit of conversation around straight run-ups, angled run-ups, and what works. And I'm a big believer of individuality in terms of, again, going back to what your X factor is or your pelvis hip separation, having a little bit of say in what you're doing. Now, there's two caveats to think about before we get into what your run-up should be. If you run up straighter, you're going to find it easier to control your line and length because you're aligned to the target. If you come at an angle, you're probably going to struggle a little bit with your line and length, but you'll be able to turn it more. So there is probably somewhere in between a big angle and a straight run up, which allows you to do both. You can deliver the ball at a good speed and be able to get your hand and your body around the side to generate all that spin that you need. So what did we find in our research? Well, we didn't find anything that agreed completely with the coaching manual in terms of getting side on at back foot contact with both your pelvis or hips and your shoulders. I think how you do it is very individual to you. So some players come in with an angle with their pelvis, so you just stay on that straight line and you rotate your shoulders back to side on. Some players do like coming in and getting side on with both their shoulders and their pelvis, and instead of rotating their shoulders back because it's already there, they rotate their pelvis forward into this position. So there's two ways of doing it. The coaching manual originally isn't very inclusive. Work out how you like to move from the bottom or the top and adjust your run up and your angle accordingly. So if you're coming in and you want to keep your pelvis in the directions, you don't have to do much with your bottom half. You might come in with an angled run up towards where you're going and rotate round. Some players that like to rotate out at back foot contact may come in a little straighter and get here and then push everything through and keep going in the sequence. There's not really a right or wrong way of doing it, but make sure you do it the right way for you. So one thing that we often talk about is this front leg and what it should be doing at front foot contact in the finger spin bowling action. A lot of the coaching literature says that you should come in, keep it braced and then rotate everything around it. There may be some theory that that's optimal for braking, but it might actually prevent you from rotating your pelvis round because the muscle structures may be quite tight. So what we found was no link to having a braced front leg, but what we do think is that whatever you do and land in position, if it's slightly bent or straight, that it stays in that position throughout the bowling action and you don't collapse and lose energy out of it. So we often get asked, well, how do we proof check or error check this research? So quite simply, we look at some of the greatest bowlers of all time and look at their actions and see whether the characteristics we pull out fit in with their techniques. So in this case, you can take the 5 top wicket takers of all time, players like Harbhajan Singh, players like Nathan Lyon, Graham Swan, etc. They all have these same characteristics. However, talking about that back foot contact position, they're mixed. Players like Harbhajan like to get side on, players like Ashwin like to get pelvis in the right place and then rotate their shoulders back. So there's two ways of doing it, and the greatest players do it in different ways before, but they all get into that front foot contact position and their records in terms of wickets and averages talk for themselves. So the final part that we like to think about in my world is can you? So we know now what the optimal bowling technique looks like, but why can not everybody do it, or why may you struggle to be able to do it if you take some of these points away and try and put them into practice? So all of us are different, we're all different heights, shapes, sizes, and we all have different strength and range of motion attributes, which can help us get into these positions and excel or sometimes limit what we can do as well. So to finish the research, we took some range of motion parameters and looked to see actually what do the bowlers with the greatest spin rates have, or the highest spin rates have, in terms of body range of motion in the hips and the shoulders. So what we found was that the bowlers with the greatest spin have the greatest arc of rotation around their front hip. So that means that if you start in the most extreme position, so I will start front on, but if I rotate outwards to externally rotated, so this is as far as my foot will point outwards, and go all the way to the other end and internally rotate it as far as possible, they have a bigger range than those that didn't spin it as much. Why is that probably important? Well, we've talked already about how important the pelvises and the movement. So if you start in a position which is really externally rotated and you can go much further than other people, you've got more range of motion to develop velocity and speed, which you can generate up the body onto the ball. So that was one of the first key things. Those that had a bigger arc had greater spin rates. The second big point is those that had greater internal rotation of the shoulder had greater spin rates. Why is that important? Well, we've talked, once you get into this front foot contact position and up here and your shoulders have gone, you then internally rotate. Again, if you've got a bigger range of motion, more time to generate speed, energy, velocity, which you can transfer up onto the ball, generating higher spin rates. So one thing that we need to be careful about in finger spin bowling is illegal actions, because the optimal technique is very close to what we try and coach for throwing, in terms of getting into this really split position with your hips and your shoulders and then rotating everything round. Now our brain has a great way of producing the outcome and what we're trying to do rather than what we're trying not to do in terms of keeping our elbow straight. So if we're struggling to produce a skill or a task and our brain goes, we've got an extra joint and I can use the elbow, it generally will do, and we'll have no idea we're actually doing it within our bowling actions. So what we need to be careful of in particular, and I see lots of players get into trouble with this, is they come in and they counter rotate these shoulders, or they get their shoulders in a position where if you're from looking at front on, the hand is past this like wall that goes through your body. Now this is really horrible. You can do this at home, get into this position and now try and get your arm up over towards the target. And the only way you'll find that you can do it if you get into a really horrible position where your shoulder really feels tight is that you get stuck here and your brain goes, well, if I've got to get it in front of my head, I can bend my elbow, it reduces all of the tension in my shoulder and I can come through. So you tend to see players that throw it, get in this position, maybe side on and stay here, but they get into this position where you can see the hand over this side of the body. They don't have the time to complete the skill and they end up having to bend to be able to get the arm up and round the head and back towards the target. So a quick snapshot just to conclude on the illegal actions. You end up in a position where if we look at use the line to show where side on is, this hand or arm gets beyond it, so past side on. You also try and externally rotate because you know that when you get up here you want to internally rotate to generate the maximum amount of spin. So you end up in a position here where you create loads of stress in the shoulder to a point where you can't get your arm up, and that's as far as I can get it up. The only way I can get up now towards the target is by bending, reducing some of that tension and coming through towards the target. So lots of players get in this position, come right back, start to create even more stress because they drive the pelvis through first, and then the only way they can get up is to come up and over and rotate as everything comes through.